Well, we're in week 4 of our Unleashed series where we're trying to call out who we are and what we're made for. And so here's the deal. We're praying right now that God would just unleash you. And here's what we believe. We believe that God, before the beginning of time, knew who you were. The creator of the universe, He knew you. He knew when you would come, how you would come, and so He loved you. And we believe that. We believe that God really did make you. And from the very time that you were born, when you came out of that womb, He knit you together there. And you may think you're an accident, and I don't know what other people think about you, but you're not an accident. And when you came out and when you breathed your first breath, He was crazy about you. He is for you. You are His. He knows every heartache you've ever encountered. He knows the insecurities that have plagued you for so long. He knows the obstacles, even right now, that are standing in the way. And you know they're standing in the way of you really stepping into just to be the man or the woman of God that He's called you to be. And we believe, and hear me on this, because I really mean this, that you have more potential in you than you could possibly understand. We believe that. And so here's the deal. We're just praying, God, would you just tell them, reveal to them, show to them, whisper it, shout it. We don't care. We want to see them unshackled. We want to see them unleashed because we know what you're made for. We believe that with our souls, and we want to unleash you. I've been unleashed. Somebody did that for me, and we just want to see this family unleashed. And I really do believe that you are more valuable and important than you possibly understand. I really believe that you do have more potential. I don't care who you are, more potential than you possibly understand. And I believe that God's plans for you and for me are not wrapped around our self-help, weight loss, successful us plans. I think God's plans for us, I think His plan for us is that we would live a life of significance. And so here's what I want to do today. I want to, because I think they get thrown into the same pot in our world, I just want to separate the two for a second. Because here's what success says. Success says, man, you got to just get after it. You got to find that thing inside of you, and you just got to pull it out and recognize your greatness. And you've got to own it, and you got to face your fears, and you've got to be more disciplined, and you've got to go after what you want. You've got to believe in it, and you've got to go after it. Put in the work. That's what success says. And significance is kind of like success, but it's also really not. Like success, you can be successful and still be about you and your family and your kingdom and your empire. And I'm just here to tell you, you cannot live a life of significance and it be about you. You just can't. And so here's what I believe, and I just want to be crystal clear, and this is where we're going today. I don't think God is calling us to a successful life. I think that God is calling us, that God is unleashing us, longing to pull us into a life of significance. And so how do we do that? How do we make sure that we're not buying into the lie and just living for success, but that we're really living a life of significance? Well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to dive in. And so if you have a Bible there with you today, your electronic device, whatever it is you use, open it up to Acts chapter 16, and we're just going to dive in. I want to give you two examples of just significant lives in the kingdom and who they were and what they did. And we just want to see some differences. Acts chapter 16, verse 6 says this. It says, Paul. And so right off the bat, Paul is the first person on the map here. And he's also one of the most significant people in the Christian faith that we could possibly think of, right? Like billions of people have come to faith because Paul lived such a life of significance. And so the question is, I'm just going to throw this out here, like there's no question Paul lived a life of significance. And so then my question is, did his life always look successful? But here's the deal. Let's just go on a little journey here. It says, Paul and his companions. Okay, what did Paul's friendships look like? This is chapter 16. But if you go back one chapter, he had this really good friend named Barnabas. And Barnabas, when they walked into town earlier, people thought that they were Zeus and Hermes. They were like this powerful combo. They were awesome together. They were so good. But in chapter 15, they had such a sharp disagreement that they parted company and they would never circle back again together. So it says, Paul and his companions traveled. So new companions, because they've been split up. And now they've traveled throughout the region of Phrygia and Galatia. And so let's talk about what's his everyday life look like. Well, when he went to Galatia, there was a town called Lystra, a city called Lystra. And when he went to Lystra, we hear the story of him running into a cripple. And this sounds very much like a successful story. I mean, he saw this cripple and he prayed over him. And the man just popped up and began walking around. Like, yeah, hey, what's up? And then an angry mob came and they grabbed Paul and they walked him out to the edge of the city and they pushed him off a cliff and they picked up rocks and they began to throw those rocks down on Paul until he thought he was dead. And then his comrades had to kind of come and grab him, hanging on to his life by a thread. Not exactly a picture of success. But it keeps on going, okay? It says, having been kept by the Holy Spirit from preaching the word in the province of Asia. Now, wait a minute. Paul was kept from preaching? Yeah. So Paul knew he was supposed to preach, and Paul had plans, but here's the problem. You ever have this? Paul had plans, and he thought they were good plans, but God said, no. As a matter of fact, it keeps on going. It says, if you look here at this scripture, it says, when they came to the border of Mysia, they tried to enter Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus showed up. Now you know it's trouble. The Spirit of Jesus showed up and said, no. And so, wait a minute. Now you've got Jesus himself saying no to your plans. And I just want to say this real fast. Paul's life of significance didn't always look like success. Why do I say that? Well, I say that because I feel like right now, before we go any further, I need to pop a bubble that there may be, that sometimes this North American Christianity can really get us sideways. And I just want to say this, that a life of significance, as clearly as I can say this, a life of significance doesn't always look like success. It just doesn't. I mean, sometimes you dive in to do what God's asked you to do, and you do it with such faith, and nobody builds you a monument. Nobody gives you any praise. It actually, in fact, costs you. In business, you had a deal and you actually lose the account because you had character. And some people don't even know the incredible graciousness and amazingness of you in the process. Sometimes you show up and nobody notices and it costs you. Sometimes we make great plans, don't we? Anybody have a plan on how you were going to raise a family before you started a family? I mean, I was going to be like the father of the decade. I was going to be so good. I used to teach on it before I had kids. And now when I teach, I'm like, the grace of Jesus be upon you, right? I mean, here's the deal. We make plans. We pick out the person. We've got the right business plan. And God, we're going to do this for you. It's really going to help us, but and God says no. And man, it feels like a 1,000-pound weight. And we're like, God, what do you mean no? Don't you know my heart? And don't you know what I wanted to do? And this is for free, but I just submit to you that when God says no, and when relationships get complicated, or when things get messy, and when it starts costing you, folks, that might be the most important part of your journey to living a life of significance. Because I believe that living a life of significance it just doesn't always look like success. It doesn't. Or let me put it this way. Living a life of success doesn't always make you feel like you're winning. It doesn't make you feel all warm and fuzzy always. And so I just want to keep going here. In verse 8 it says, so they passed by Mysia. And remember that his plans, he got shut down there. And so they passed by Mysia and went down to Troas. And so question, we're about to find out, where does Paul go when his plans, when God keeps saying no and relationships aren't what he thought, and when things are a little bit more complicated and he's threatened by his life, where is Paul going to go when he feels like he's got two options? Number one, he could say, you know what? Fine. God, I've been trying it your way. I'm just going to go back to what I know I can win at. I mean, like if Paul, if his life is driven by success, then he's going to go back to what's familiar. He's going to head back to Turkey. He's going to go back into Asia. And he's just going to do that because there, guess what? People like his sermons. Lots of people coming to Christ. He has great friendships. Nobody's trying to kill him there. He's like, if I want to win, I'm going to head back to what's familiar. But that's not what Paul does. Instead, Paul goes to Troas. And Troas, you need to know, is like on the edge of the continent of where the gospel has gone thus far. And just right across the ocean is a new place called Macedonia. There's not been a single convert in Europe. And something about Paul says, listen, I was made for this moment. God, you put in me to take the gospel to people that didn't have it. And I know who I am. And so I'm going to go to the place, to the edge where I can still do and still be what you made me for. Because I know that you made me with a purpose. And I know that you have called me to a life of significance. And so Paul, he goes to Troas. And then in verse 9 it says, during the night, Paul had a vision. Now, just a clarification point here. During the night, Paul didn't have a dream. Paul had a vision. And so you know how that works, right? You have a dream when you're what? When you're asleep. And so it's in the middle of the night, and Paul didn't have a dream. And sometimes God works that way. Paul was in the middle of the night, and Paul had a vision. What's that mean? Well, what I've come to learn is that there is something that was keeping Paul up. And I know this because I've known too many people, men and women, who end up getting godly visions. And come to find out, they tend to be the type of people that go up on a roof, or they find a quiet place, and they're just always praying, and they're just always saying, God, look, I'm right here on the edge, and I know what you made me for, but just tell me, just show me, I'll go. Now, I picture Paul just coming in and just praying and just saying, look, I'm not going to go back to what everybody else settles for. I want to live the life that you made me for. And I think in that moment, I think Paul had a vision. God shows up, as he always does, and he gave him a vision of a man. Not a crowd, not a map. He gave him a man, because God wants us to see people's faces. You know that, right? He just wants us to see that they are human beings, that he made them, and that we could see the value in them and who they could be and where they could go. But they just don't know, and nobody's come to them. And he said he's got this picture of a man in Macedonia standing and begging him, come over to Macedonia. Man, you got to come and help us. And Paul takes a peek at this. And I just love this because it's so cool. Verse 10, let me keep going here. It says, after Paul had seen the vision, and isn't that funny? Not all of them saw the vision, but all of them went on the vision. Some of you're not dreamers, and that's okay, that's cool. But get a friend who is. And so after a friend had seen the vision, we got ready at once to leave for Macedonia. That's the place that nobody's ever come. And he says, concluding, like it was just something that had never hit us before, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel. That God had called us to preach the gospel to who? The gospel to them. You ever had a moment like that in your life when you recognize, when you're like, that's why you said no, God. And you don't always get it, but they got it. Because sometimes you're like, oh, you said no to the plans because you're saying, not because you're saying no to me. No. God made you. God fashioned you. He formed you. And so don't buy into that. He's not saying no to you. He's just saying no to, you thought you wanted to do this and you wanted to marry that and you wanted to start this. And he's like, no. It's not no to that. It's no to that because I want to say yes to something better than you know. Like I have a plan for you, and you're going to take the gospel to a place where it's never been. And if you would have said yes to that, you would have never been here saying yes to this. And Paul, and I love this, see, Paul's so good, he just says, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. And I love that. And so I just want to, can I just throw in a little David commentary here? Here's what I hear Paul saying. Is this okay? And you can agree or you can disagree, but I read this and I just hear Paul saying, David, you got to stop. Like David, if you want to live a life of significance, you've got to stop trying to be so successful. You've got to stop trying to always win. You've got to stop trying to find the margin in your bank account. You've got to stop building your own kingdom, even like the Christian version of your kingdom. And some of you need to hear this. Not every business is a Chick-fil-A, okay? And wouldn't that be amazing? You're like, you have an idea, and you have an idea, and you have an idea. And because you're Christian, there's going to be 9 miles of people waiting for your product. But it doesn't work like that. You know what? Not every significant family in the kingdom is super affluent and has 2.2 kids and all their relationships are perfect and their family all loves them. There's no drama at work and they retire at 65. That's just not real. And so I think, sometimes in order for us to step into just a life of significance, we're going to have to get our eyes off of our plans. We're going to have to get our eyes off our hurts. We're going to have to get our eyes off God's no's and the times He didn't let us do things we think. We're going to have to prayerfully, we're just going to have to prayerfully put ourselves into a place to say, God, I know that you made me. What do you want to use me for? God, give me a vision. Give me a vision for people, somebody that needs Him, and let me respond. And just real fast, I want to stop here because that's kind of the difference, right? I mean, success is about you giving your life for a dream that you have for you. Significance is what happens when you give your life for a dream that you have for somebody else. And all of a sudden, it's not just that you have a dream for them, but you have, compassion for them, and you have a heart for them. You have a faith for them. You have hope for them. Something wells up inside of you for them. And here's what I want to say. That living a life of significance is having a vision not for you, but it's for other people. It's for other people. And I just, I hope you hear my heart on this. I hope that you know me on this. But folks, we've got to have a better heart for people. I'm praying that God would just continue to grow me in this. And I'm here telling you, this is why our vision statement for 2024, by the way, is not unleash the full force to help you live your best life. That's not it. You want to know the worst way for you to find your best life? Just start chasing your best life. I mean, what did Jesus say? Jesus said if you want to find your life, what do? You got to lose it. You got to lose your life if you want to find it. And so we want to unleash the full force of the church to love people, to see people, to recognize them, and not be a big deal. And then not just see crowds and names, but to see faces. Living a life of significance is having a vision for other people. Well, verse 12 here, let's keep going. Verse 12 says, "From there we traveled to Philippi, a Roman colony and the leading city." This is a very strategic and important city in that district of the entire Macedonian region. This leading city, and we stayed there several days. Several days. I wonder what they were doing for several days. We'll get to that. But right now, you just need to know it's an important city. And then verse 13 says, on the Sabbath, we went outside the city gate to the river, where we expected to find a place of prayer. Now, let me explain that. And so usually when Paul steps into a city, he goes straight to the synagogue. I mean, that's what Jesus taught him. Jesus usually taught in the synagogues. And so Paul usually taught in the synagogue. But he shows up to this huge city, this massively important city, and he recognizes, hey, they don't have a synagogue. Why don't they have a synagogue? Well, to have a synagogue, a formal synagogue, you have to have at least 10 Jewish men. Apparently, they didn't have 10 Jewish men. And so he's like, oh, they probably got a couple here. And so here's what we'll do. We'll go to the place where they're going to meet. Where are they going to meet? Well, we know because of Jewish custom, if you don't have a synagogue, then you go down to a ritually pure place, like a stream, and you would know kind of right where they would be, and you would know where to gather no matter where you were. And so we went down expecting what? Probably to find the men in the city. And so what happens? It says, so then we sat down and we began to speak to the who? I mean, Paul's like, wait here. Didn't you give me a vision? I mean, didn't you give me a vision for like this man in Macedonia? Like, God, I'm used to men. That's what I do, right? Like when I come in and that's who I connect with, and that's, should he have been surprised? I don't know. You know, I mean, Jesus was always surprising, always breaking tradition on the role that he saw women take in the gospel. He always was. And by the way, the first gospel carrier was a who? It was a woman. But what I know is that in that group of people, to his surprise, verse 14 tells us this. It says, one of those listening was a woman from the city of Thyatira, just up the road, named Lydia. And Lydia was a dealer in purple cloth. And so right in front of Paul, he gives him not only an important city, but he also gives him a leading woman in the city. And how do we know that? Well, Lydia had this job. She was a businesswoman. She dealt in purple cloth. And purple was the color of royalty at that time. Why? Because I'm not going to go through the nerdy stuff here, but it took like 10,000 shellfish to get like just a few ounces of this purple color. You just couldn't find purple anywhere. And so she could make a lot of money off of purple dye. And Lydia most likely not only had a lot of money, but she had a lot of influence. God is connecting Paul to one of the most significant leaders in the entire city. What else? Well, it says she was a worshiper of God. What's that mean? Well, it means that she wasn't a Jew. She was a Greek, but she believed in the principles of Yahweh. She believed in the things about God. She just didn't know Jesus. She was kind of almost there. And then it says immediately, when he sits down, it says, and I love this, it says, the Lord opened her heart to respond to Paul's message. And this word opened here is the Greek word diagono. Diagono is less of like she heard Paul's message and she felt really warm and fuzzy. That's not it. She heard Paul's message, and all of a sudden, her mind, it's like it's a new opening. That's what the word means. She heard Paul teach, and all of a sudden, her mind just opened up. And all of a sudden, she saw her life and who she was and where she'd been and what she'd done and what she'd lost and who Jesus was and the hope that he had and peace. And it was like every single dot just started connecting. You could just see her light up. And before we get any further here, I just want to say this is what happens. This is what happens when we live a life of significance, right? Living a life of significance is showing up to the people and to the opportunities that are actually in front of you. Why do I say that? Well, I say that because Paul wanted to go to Bithynia. Paul wanted to go to Mysia. And God said, no, Paul, we're not going to do that. Paul wanted to take his best friend, and he's like, God, I mean, we're powerful when we're together. I mean, when we come together, it's like Zeus and Hermes. Come on. And God's like, yeah, no. Like he's going to go to this way. He's going to go this way, and you're going to love Silas. He's going to be a great partner. He's a great guy. And Paul, he's okay, but I'm going to do what I'm good at. Like, I connect with men, God, and so you're going to get me connected to men, right? We stayed around for like 3 days looking for men, and Jesus, I just felt like he just kind of smiles and is like, no, it's going to be women, Paul. But that's the difference, right? A life of success gets to pick the people that we bless and give to and share with. Why? It's what we like and it benefits us. And we know that if we give and we bless and we do this here, then we know, intelligently, you're smart people, that on the backside somebody is going to see that and we're going to get some kind of reward. It's going to up our social status. But here's the thing that's so different. Jesus, when he talked about a life of significance, he said, hey, you need to throw a party. But when you throw a party, what does he say? Why don't you invite some people that there's no way they can repay you? They're not going to help you with your social cred. In fact, it actually might hurt. And that's not what we expect. But God just has such a way of planning the right people for His kingdom in the right time, but it's never who we expect. We want the CEO, but He gives us the janitor. We want the NFL player because we're like, he's got the microphone. And brother, we just won. And he's like, yeah, see this young man right here? He doesn't have a daddy. Really engaged in his life. Can you be faithful with him? And I just think that's Paul in this moment. He's not where he wants to be, and the people and the stuff, and it's not the setup that he wants, but it's like God's just whispering, Paul, can you be faithful right now to these women that are in front of you and the opportunities that I've given you? And I just love it. Because Paul shows up and God shows out. We do the sharing, He does the saving. That's the way it works. And all because of that, because Paul showed up to the people and the opportunities right there in front of him, Lydia becomes the very first convert in Europe. And when this girl comes to Christ, it's like a sonic boom. I mean, she is unbelievable. I love the next verse. Verse 15 says this. It says, when she and the members of her household. And so, time out. Where did her household come from? They weren't at the group. Well, Lydia started hearing the message of Paul and what he was giving. And she was like, don't move. I got some people. And she ran off apparently, and she was grabbing all the people in her household. You got to hear this man. You got to hear this. You got to come hear this guy. And so literally every single, the members of her household get baptized. And then she's barely popped up out of the water, and she just starts inviting Paul and all of his traveling companions to her home. And they're like, yeah, I don't know. And she's like, well, if you consider me a believer in the Lord, and how do you say no to that, I mean, she's not really asking here. She said, if you consider me a believer in the Lord, come and stay at my house. And she persuaded us. You ever met somebody like Lydia? I mean, she's like, oh, everybody's going to find out about Jesus now. You're going to come to my house, and I've got people, and I'm going to invite her, and I'm going to invite her. And so you need to call so-and-so, and we need to have everybody figure it out. And Lydia, she's just this perfect example of this living a life of significance. She's so good at is surrendering what you have so that others can have the hope of Jesus. You ever met a Lydia? I mean, I love it. They're the people that are like, no, I don't care who you are, you're coming to Christ. And I'm just telling you, that's how it works. I mean, Paul had the gift of preaching and articulation, and Lydia had the gift of influence and affluence. And together, like shoulder to shoulder, full force style, they just launched the first church in Europe. And it was powerful, and it was beautiful, and it was one of the premier churches that really got behind and financed the rest of Paul's ministry to take the gospel where it hadn't yet been. And I'm telling you, there's something so powerful about living a life of significance when you start surrendering what you have so others can have the hope of Jesus. I've seen this so many times. I know a businessman who decided, you know what? I'm going to surrender what I have so people can have the hope of Jesus. And so he leads and he prays for his employees. And then he started a fund for the company where any of his employees that see a need that Jesus would respond to, they can use that fund so they can learn how to be the hands and feet of Jesus. That's what happens when you surrender what you have so others can have the hope of Jesus. I know some people that are living on less than 50% of their income. Why? Because they recognize that kind of, like Luke 12:48, that passage where Jesus says, to him who is given much, much is going to be required. Much more is going to be demanded. And here's the deal. They recognize that the wealth that they've been given and the assets that they have and the influence that they've been given has not been about their own personal empire. And they're taking their resources and they're redirecting. They're taking their leadership energies and they're redirecting them. That's what happens when you start surrendering what you have so other people can have the hope of Jesus. And some of you are so Lydia, it's unbelievable. You invite others to church again and again, and you don't give up just because you get a no answer. There's something about you that you just need people to know the same hope that you have. And you'll give up your cred. You'll give up what people think about you because you know, I will give up what I have. I don't care what people think because I want you to know the hope of Jesus. And here's what I know. Here's what I know about most of you. I'm just going to be transparent right now. I know so many of you watching, listening to this sermon today, you don't want to live for success. You know it. I mean, it might be the default because it's all that America talks about is winning. But if I were to ask you, some of you have lost your soul because you lived your life wrapped around success. I mean, most of you know somebody that got so wrapped up into their job, so wrapped up into their title and their perfect marriage and their perfect family and the perfect this and the perfect that and this house and that investment, and you've watched them and they're so empty and they're so alone. And there's something inside of you that says, I know I don't want that. I just don't know what else there is. Live a life of significance. Live a life that says, you know what? I don't have to aim at a perfect marriage or a successful marriage where we just stayed married and we're happy forever. Good luck with that. No, we are aiming for a significant marriage where we're going to see people and we're not going to get wrapped around how we feel today, but we're going to bless people and we're going to love people and we're going to have people into our lives and we're going to leverage our resources for something that actually matters, not for our empires. And you know what? I'm tired. I just don't want to try to be a successful parent anymore. Good, because we're all failing anyhow. And so let's be significant parents. Let's pray over them when they don't know. Let's try to give them a model even when we feel like we're miserable at it. That's something they can follow, where they can leverage their life for something and then not just repeat our mistakes in the future. Let's leverage our businesses. Let's leverage our workplaces. Let's stop worrying about the next promotion that we're going to get, and let's start recognizing that God has put you exactly where you are in the role that you are, around the people that you have for a reason. Get a vision for people. Step into that opportunity that He's made for you. And you know what? If it costs you something, pay it. Because maybe somebody can finally walk into the only thing that actually matters around here. And I'm just here to tell you, could you continue to just give the church or give missions or give away to people just your disposable income that doesn't really affect you? Yeah, I guess you could. Could you keep trying to win God's love and check off Christian things that you do and don't do, isolated from the world so that one day you can win heaven? Sure. But don't you tell me that's what you were made for. Don't you tell me that's what you were made for. You know it's not. Some of us have to undo the lie that we come to Christ so we can be successful. We need to start recognizing that God has filled us with His presence and His Spirit. We need a vision for people. We've got to show up to the things that are right in front of us, and we've got to start opening our hands so that others can know the hope of Jesus.